Hello everyone, welcome to another video by HigherPowers.net. My name is Joshua Brown, and today we are talking about how to answer job interview questions. To do this, we want to break it down into two different parts. First, the research that you're going to do, and we're going to break that down even further. And the second part being the structure. So this has to do with the STAR method and how we're actually going to give back our answer once we find the details from our research, okay? And then after that, we're going to do some examples, some of the example job interview questions, and then some last minute tips, all right? So we're going to be able to answer, again, any interview question, well, almost 99% of the questions that you're going to get, all right? So whether it be standard or behavioral. So again, standard is going to be something like, what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? Something along those lines. While a behavioral question is going to ask for a more specific example. So that's going to be something like, tell me about a time when you had to communicate with a coworker, or you had to deal with a very difficult customer. So again, asking for specific examples. So hopefully with this method, you're going to be able to break down that barrier and actually use this system with any type of interview question, whether it be standard or behavioral. Again, that's because it's important to use details no matter the interview question. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to get started with the research section. Okay, so the research section first is itself going to be broken down into two different parts. So the first part of research that we want to talk about is the research that you're going to do into not only the company, but into the job listing as well that you actually applied to. So this is you going back before the interview process, seeing, okay, what were they looking for? What were the points, that they emphasized? What was the language that they used? Okay. Now, again, part of this process is to see who you're going to be interviewing with. Now, you may not be able to always get access to that information, but through the job listing, you may be able to tell, okay, this is a larger company. I may be interviewing with somebody, in HR first. It may be 2 or 3 rounds of interviews, versus if it's something like on Craigslist where you may actually be meeting with the owner, or you may be meeting with the hiring manager, the person that is going to be your boss, say, the very first interview, and they're making that make or break decision right then and there after they see all the candidates. So that's something to keep in mind. Your answers to their questions are going to be different. The questions that they ask are going to be different based off of that information. Okay. And then you also just want to do just general research into the company. Do they have a website? What does their information say about us? Do they give to charity? Are they a part of the community? Other information that you can use during the later end of the interview, why do you want to work for us? What brought you to our company? Things like that. All that stuff is fair game, okay? Do they even have a website? How tech savvy are they? Keep that in mind. Is there news about their impending lawsuit? Okay, maybe you don't go to that interview, all right? All that information, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to that company to do before you go into the interview, okay? So those are some things to think about. Now, I have some notes here. I have an actual job listing here for a basic customer service job. I like to use customer service examples because they relate well to other jobs. So here are just some things that I think can be pointed out that you can go ahead and pick from examples that we'll talk about in the other half of the research to use when answering your questions. Okay, so for this listing, it talks about handling a high volume of inbound calls, so a call center type environment. So obviously if you have experience, you're going to be wanting to talk about situations, using those as examples during your interview. It also talks about, your time management skills and your communication skills. So, those are very broad and general skills, but you're going to want to use specific examples. What are times when you did communicate? What are times when you had to use time management skills? Were you on a deadline? They may ask questions like that because, again, in a call center environment, it demands your timeliness, your ability to communicate. So obviously 2 very important skills. So again, you want to go back through the job listing. Once you get the interview, what did they emphasize? What was important to that company? And again, what language did they use? Maybe you had the same type of job, but you don't think of it the same way in the same words. You want to be able to translate to their HR or to their hiring managers Okay, I've done the same thing. I have experience doing the thing that you are looking for. We just called it something different. It was, X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's very important. Two of the main keys that we're going to stress throughout this video is showing the company that you have experience they're looking for, and then obviously during the interview process, can you communicate that experience to them in language that they can understand? Okay, it sounds very simple, but it can be a very difficult process, as you're going through the interview based off of the questions. You can't just answer whatever you want. You have to tailor your answers to fit their questions while also showing the experience half of it. Okay? So again, company research, very important. The job listing research, very important as well. So the second half of the research is going to be personal research. Okay. Now you won't do this nearly as often, hopefully, right? Because you're going to be doing the company research for almost every company, obviously, that you want to interview with or that you're going to be getting called for. The personal research may happen far less times. Okay. So the personal research consists of finding situations where you had positive outcomes in your job, no matter how big or how small. Okay, that's very important. So they can be major wins or minor wins. It can be awards that you've received, times where you overcame difficult situations. Think about those things that we normally say are bad to put on your resume, that you're a good communicator, that you have good time management skills, right? Very bland and very generic without the accompanying details. Okay, think about those skills, but then find specific examples when you had to use your time management skills. How did that help you? How did that help the company? All right, and what is the positive outcome? Okay, so you're going to have to go back through your resume before the interview process. Try and find 3 to 4 of those types of stories, okay? And eventually, when we talk about the structure later, we're going to see that you can use a lot of these different stories for different questions that they're going to ask. What is your greatest strength? How do you handle pressure? Right? You can use a time when you've communicated to handle pressure, a time when your organization skills helped you under pressure, your time management skills. Okay, so all of these different skills that you have can fit into different questions. It's about finding those specific examples, enough from each job. I would say, again, 2 to 3, 4 if you can do it. And again, don't go out of your way to think of, where you won the Employee of the Year award. It's not about those types of accomplishments. Although they are nice, those types of things would probably get you the interview. Now it's time to explain yourself, right? That's what the interview process is about. Is you say on this piece of paper you can do X, Y, and Z. Show me, or at least tell me. Give me a good picture of what you've been doing, for the past 5 to 10 years of your life. All right, so that's what the personal research is about. So again, that may not change that much interview to interview. Again, you will want to tailor the language and maybe specific skill sets based off of the employer. And again, this is very different, say, for customer service. A lot of those skills translate to a lot of other jobs. But let's say I like to use the example of a medical assistant, right? Very specific skill set, not so much that you can use in other jobs. Things like drawing blood, doing blood pressure, those types of things where you would just use those skills as a medical assistant. But if they are looking for those skills, if you're applying for a medical assistant position, you have them on your resume, you need the stories, the examples to back up what the piece of paper says, right? What your resume says, because that's, again, what the interview process is about. So again, the personal research goes along with the company research. Those two things you can do kind of in harmony as you go from interview to interview. Hopefully not too many, right? We're trying to get this down to a science here. Okay, so the research, that's one half of the foundation that we want to build with this process. So then we have a whole second half, and that's the structure. So the structure is going to be how we're going to put together the answer to their question. And we're going to do this by telling a story, all right? Now, I want you to think of it kind of like a children's story, where you have a hero, he's presented with a problem, either it comes to him or we're out on his journey, there's a problem. He has to take an action, right? He has to do something to overcome this problem. And then there is a result. And then often in children's books, it's a very good result, right? There's something positive, there's a good outcome. And that's the types of stories that you want to tell. Now, a lot of people do this using the STAR method. If you're not familiar with that, STAR is an acronym. It stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. So, for example, in the workforce, STAR could be used as a situation where you dealt with a difficult customer. You worked with that customer, you found a resolution, you did something, you took an action with that situation that you were presented with, and then there was a result. And hopefully it was, the customer was happy or happier than when they first called in, right? There was some positive outcome. And we want to take the information that you can learn from STAR, right? The situation, the action, the result, go back through our research, find where we have those positive results, and then build on top of STAR with our own story. And the important part of, those children's stories or any story is you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's a lot of good details that sell the story. Okay? You want to become a great storyteller during your interview. If you're not, I want you to think about either people like stand-up comedians, or if you're not into comedy, maybe you have in your group of friends or in your family somebody who can keep your attention while they're telling a story. Even if the story, turns out at the end it's rather mundane or it's kind of boring. But during the story, the way they are telling it, the details that they are capturing with your imagination, okay, all of those qualities you want to have when describing your past experience, right? Because that's the bottom line. You have presented your resume to them, and you say that you can do X, Y, and Z. You say you have experience doing these things. Now you need to tell me about it. You need to say, okay, this is an actual time when I used this skill and something good happened out of it. Okay, so that's when we're talking about the structure. You have an A, B, and C. You have a beginning. You're setting the stage of how important a specific task was. Or during your daily routine, even if it was something like that, you not doing that task would upset a whole range of other people from doing their jobs, right? What's at stake, right? Okay, then what's the action that you took? Was it something that you had to step in and you made a safety decision? You made another positive decision. You took an action that normally others wouldn't have taken? Or again, by your inaction, would something bad have happened? Okay, and then again, the result. Describe the result. Say, if it was a really good positive outcome, make sure that you describe just how positive it was. If you had a certain accolade, or, if your coworker came up to you after and said, hey, thanks for letting me know that piece of information. Things like that are small. These are very small details that happen in our daily work lives. But as a part of the whole, as a company, as the workflow process of people getting their jobs done day in and day out, all these little things that you do are important. And so during the interview process, you have to be a salesman for yourself. And part of that is, again, telling the great story. So, I can only describe telling a story so much without getting into some examples. So I have some examples here that I would really like to get into. So let's go ahead and get into a few examples here that we can use. And through my research here, what is your greatest strength is a question that's often asked of me. So I'd like to start off with that. So again, using everything that we've just talked about here, I want to use an example from my own life, from my own career. And I think that helps because obviously I know it the best, but it's also going to be something that I can walk you through from how I did the research to how I actually put it into an answer. Okay, so let me kind of describe the situation. It's going to take a little bit, so I appreciate you bear with me, but I'm doing this to kind of lay the groundwork so we get the whole process through. Okay, so in my previous life, I was a career services director at a school, and we also had an education department, administrative department, an admissions department as well. And we all had to work in tandem. So for something like what is your greatest strength? If I wanted to say communication, my ability to communicate, I was going to use this as an example. One thing that would often happen is we would have students that I would need to get a hold of to help get them jobs, because my job depended on getting students jobs, at least graduated students, that is. And sometimes they were not the easiest to get in contact with. However, some of those students would often come through to meet with either other departments, to meet with our administrative team, to get a past transcript or other type of certificate that they had earned while at school. And I had talked to our other department heads there to open lines of communication to say, if a student comes in for whatever other reason, just have them come talk to me, see if I can help them in some way. And then, of course, the opposite was true as well. If I was helping a student with a job that had been hard to get a hold of, may not have been paying their bills for the finance team, we need to have them get in contact. Or have you not picked up your transcript yet? The administration team, doesn't want to hold on to this any longer. So building around that situation, talking about the communication, we can use that as an example, as an answer in other questions, but to plug it into the greatest strength. I would say something like, my greatest strength is my ability to communicate. As a career services director, it was my responsibility to work with students to get them jobs after they had graduated. Sometimes it wasn't the easiest to get a hold of these students, so I worked with our other department heads to communicate better, not only within ourselves, within the school, but also with the students, because it was important for the whole organization of the school. Basically, it was life or death for the school if either one of two things happened. We didn't get them to pay their bills, so we couldn't get our paychecks, or two, we didn't get them jobs and we would be shut down. So those two things were helped by this communication process of, if I was talking to a student, there would be a need to say, okay, have you talked to these other people, right? And then also the need for them to say, student calls in and says, I'm going to come pick up my transcript at 2. I want to be there in the front lobby to greet them, if they're on my file, if I need to help them get a job. So that communication, we are able to ensure the livelihood of not only the staff there, but of the students going forward, so that I can provide them with more information about jobs, but just, so the school stays in business. So I think that's really why my ability to communicate is my greatest strength. Okay. So one other thing, just another tip that I would say, I like to bracket my answers with the actual question. So you'll notice there, I say at the beginning, my greatest strength is, and then you give your answer. And then at the end you say, and that's why this is my greatest strength. I like to do that especially at the end, because sometimes you'll just be talking and you'll find yourself on a tangent, and then maybe you'll stop talking, you're done, stop talking. They don't know that you've stopped talking. So there's this kind of awkward silence in the room, and really in an interview process, you want to get rid of any of those awkward silences, right? Okay, so hopefully with that, you kind of see the process of this very big, complicated situation that I described, but really all it amounted to was either me picking up the phone and saying, hey, do you need to talk to so-and-so? Or somebody doing that for me. But just talking about that with our coworkers in meetings, bringing this up and saying, hey, let's make this a process. It doesn't have to be, this whole big thing. It just to say, if there's a past student, someone who's graduated, everybody needs to talk to them before they leave the building. So that coordination, even though it's something small, when you tell the story, you say what's at stake, right? It becomes almost a grander scale of things. It doesn't mean that you have to lie or exaggerate. You obviously always want to tell the truth. We don't call it a story because it's made up. It's a story because it's something that you need to make interesting. Okay, so hopefully that gives one example. Another example I'll use from my previous life for the question, how do you deal with pressure? And again, I hope you're noticing that situation I could use for dealing with pressure. I could just put the stakes a little bit differently. Part of the pressure of my job was getting other people jobs. So anything that alleviated that pressure, that pressure, I could be able to put into a story because it was so important. However, I'll use a different example. So again, in my past life, we went through an audit during the process of the time when I was director in career services. So that audit involved our accreditation and also a state agency that looked at, you say here in your books that these people are hired because again, our accreditation would depend on how many people got jobs. You say you got these people hired, now you need to show us. So what the accreditors would actually do is come in, check all our records, check the books. There were people for our education, for admissions, for career services. It was across the board. So what they would do is actually call in my office with me sitting there, either the student or the workplace where they were supposed to be working, right? So a very pressure-filled situation. So again, that's just kind of the gist of what happened. I don't want you to be concerned, oh, I've never been through an audit, or I didn't go through something, you can scale this down to whatever situation, or if you've been through something, on a much grander scale than that, scale it up. Scale up the proportions of everything. How important it was, what was at stake, what skills you used. So for this example, how do you deal with pressure? I want to tell them how I deal with pressure, but I'm also going to incorporate my skill, say, to be organized. So if I'm going to answer this question, say one of the ways I deal with pressure is by being organized and by preparation. Going through an audit, we did have some notice, but it was about a month, and even then it wasn't a secure date. So we had about 2 days notice of an actual date of the audit, but we knew about a month in advance. So before that, we had a preparation process of keeping not only my own student files, but also the student files that were kept by our education and our finance department. Oftentimes we would have to interchange those between departments, so it was vitally important. We always knew where a student's file and all their paperwork was at all times. So going through this audit, I was able to rely on my preparation for having my files organized, having the proper paperwork that I needed, and by having all of that ready, once the audit came, yes, there was pressure just because the situation, a bunch of people were there, the company president of our school was there. A lot of people, a lot depended and a lot rided on us passing this audit. I knew that I had that preparation in my back pocket. I knew that I had prepared for this moment, and so when the process actually came, it was quite pleasant. You get to meet new people, and they talk, and tell you stories about all the different times that they've audited. It hasn't gone as well as it's gone here, and so you kind of try and make light of the situation, even though you feel the pressure, you can still deal with it. So I think that's why my organizational skills really helped me to be able to deal with a lot of pressure. Okay, again, so capping the answer there at the end with the question. But you can see as I go through, I'm setting up the situation, right? There's this audit coming. What's the action I took? Being organized, staying prepared, and what was the result? Everything went really well. We passed the audit, and I was able to move on from that situation, having that experience, and again, getting to meet new people, especially people through, the state departments that had worked there and had, told us stories about, their experience. It was a very valuable process. So those are just a couple examples of questions that I think you can really apply this method to, going back in, finding that research, putting it into that story structure where you are emphasizing how important these things are. And again, I want to re-emphasize, this can be something, even if you are somebody who's in the food service industry and you work as a line cook at a fast food restaurant, right? There are things that are very difficult about that job, dealing with the amount of pressure, especially if you're working in things like drive-through. You have to depend on your ability to communicate with your coworkers. So don't think that, my job is deemed not that hard in society. You have to tell the story of why it's important. Okay, your next job is going to depend on it. All right, so those are just a few examples. And I'd like to finish up with just a few last minute tips. One of the things that I can tell you is it is sometimes very difficult to not only overcome, okay, how do I actually answer these questions, but dealing with maybe social pressures or anxieties of talking in front of other people. One of the best things I can recommend to do is to practice, whether it be with a friend, another coworker. Don't tell them that you're applying for other jobs. A family member, or even if it's just the mirror. Okay, get comfortable talking out loud. Make sure you know that your volume is appropriate. If you have to record yourself on your phone, be that whatever it is, get that practice of telling a story, because you don't want to have to rely on saying something back verbatim, or using rote memorization where you just say it word for word and there's no emotion in it. There's no feeling. You want to show them how important each of these situations are. Show them, I use this experience. I've done this before. What you say that you need, I have it. I have described it here, and now I'm telling you about it as well. So that's the only way you can really, really get good. And obviously, if you just have a few interviews every other year or whenever you go for a job, you're not going to get that much practice. So practice, practice, practice. And the other tip is to, again, like I said before, bracket your answers. You want to avoid that downtime. So if somebody asks you what's your greatest strength, you say, my greatest strength is, describe your strength, and then finish it with, and that's why I think, communication is my greatest strength. Okay, so I really honestly think if you do the research, each time an interview comes up, you put your structure in, you put the time to think of these stories, and again, think of them through the lens of the employer. Does this person have the experience that I need? Do they have experience using it? What is that experience like? Were there positive outcomes? Okay, think about all of those things, the research and the structure in those types of terms. And if you do that, I think you're going to have a really great shot at any interview question that comes your way. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. We're going to have some more videos coming up in the next few months where I talk about specific questions. We're going to go into a lot more detail. Obviously, if you can't tell, any of these topics, I could go on for an hour at a time. So if you have any questions after this video, please go ahead and write them in the comments and I will get to them as soon as I can. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching this video. Have a great rest of your day.